Hello and a very warm welcome to Insight. I am Amandra Bhatt. Today we talk about India's relations with Nepal in the light of Sushma Swaraj's visit. The External Affairs Minister was in Nepal for 3 days to co-chair the meeting of the Indo-Nepal Joint Commission, which took place after a gap of 23 years. She also did the groundwork for the visit of Prime Minister Narendra Modi, which is due to take place later this week. This will be the first visit by an Indian Prime Minister after a gap of 17 years. Today we discuss what this visit means for India's relations with Nepal and what lies ahead for our relations with that country. And to discuss the same, we have with us in our studios three distinguished guests. Please welcome Professor Sreeram Chaulia. He is a professor and dean at the Jindal School of International Affairs. Welcome to Insight, Professor Chaulia. Professor Chaulia, the External Affairs Minister Sushma Swaraj has described her visit as very successful. Do you think this visit could really impart a renewed momentum to ties with Nepal?
Yeah, especially because we have now agreed to and we had even earlier agreed to, but this time it looks like they will indeed review and revise the 1950 treaty, which has been contentious. So I think that's something momentous. I think the overall reason why we are now taking Nepal more seriously is because the democratic forces have been unleashed in the country, and there's more public opinion. Public sphere is more agog with opinions about what India is doing. There was always criticism of what India was doing, as well as, of course, supporters. But then I think now it's difficult to take any country, be it Bhutan or Nepal, for granted. We cannot just say, well, they're anyway, tethered to us like an umbilical cord, and we don't have to try too hard. I think now, and with the Chinese factor, which I'm sure we'll discuss, there is pressure, and we need to be proactive. So it's good that we are thinking about reviewing and potentially revising this treaty. It's also good Sushma Swaraj met at the last moment, I heard, the Communist Party, which is the second largest one in the Constituent Assembly, ahead of the Maoists. So they are, of course, critical to the current dispensation. And I think behind the scenes, we've always wanted this constitution drafting process to go forward and to be, which has been muddled for so many years now. And we are favoring the democratic transition. The days when we were seen as somehow pro-monarchy or trying to bring them back is just long gone. So I think we are, and then I think that's an advantage too, right? With Nepal becoming democratic and we being an established democracy in the region, it's all the more reason why our visits and our diplomacy we should stand out. Because if it's just economics, then the Chinese will always swamp us in that region. So where are we different, and where do we have an advantage? It's with culture. Right. Nepal is a Hindu majority country. Prime Minister apparently is going to talk about creating a link between Banaras and Pashupati and all these things. So that's all good. And then second thing is our political tradition, which is inspired Nepalese intellectuals. The ruling Nepalese Congress has always been inspired by our democratic example. So I think this is where we need to harness. And of course the economic things are there, where we have we should be much more generous, and I think the trade has been lopsided, and hopefully all these will be rectified. So overall we need to be, I think, thinking about it in a dynamic situation where this country is transforming, and we cannot just let it, the relationship lie low. I think now is the time to take it to a different pitch. So Prime Minister's visit will be the icing on the cake.
Okay. Professor Chaulia, what do you think? We've signed a number of agreements in key areas of defense, security, hydropower and so on. Do you think they're going to get moving as fast as Nepal would expect them to?
I think Mr. Modi should think about creating a kind of a dual structure, especially with our technical assistance and cooperation and these kind of, which have great strategic value. We should put them on some kind of fast track basis, so we are not seen to be laggards. What I mean by this is that he has, his own record is of bypassing many of these hurdles and blockages in our slow way of doing things when he was chief minister. So I think it will make sense. For example, critical countries like Nepal or Afghanistan or Sri Lanka, which are so vital to our national security interests. We should be able to create a kind of a different system where our private sector, for example, with contractors, with ingredients, with supplies. There are a lot of technical issues, but it should be on a deliver on time basis or even faster than before. Simply because the competition is hard, and at the end of the day, as a small country that's sandwiched in the Himalayas, Nepal will always try to extract leverage by looking at competitors from elsewhere who can deliver the same roads and highways and railways and hydel projects at a lesser cost or potentially at greater financing in terms of interest rates and faster. And there the Chinese are unbeatable. So what we need to do, I think, is to try and create a complete different structure systemically, where our foreign aid projects, especially for infrastructure, are put on a different yardstick altogether and have different measurable indices. Because domestic projects, you can understand, the corruption and the middlemen and the kickbacks and the slowdowns. But I think we should prioritize the foreign ones, saying that this is a vital national interest. I mean, of course, even domestic infrastructure can be called vital national interest. But here, I think, the Commerce Ministry, the MEA, all of us, we should combine with industries and with our private sector organization, our companies, and do something radically different that will set us apart and, in a way, bridge this perception, which is true, that we are slackers.
Okay. Professor Chaulia, on the revision of the 1950 treaty, do you think there's going to be a review this time, or the Nepali side is going to shy away again?
Traditionally, the ruling Nepalese Congress has been not a big advocate for changing this. It's the left-oriented parties that have been, both the communists and the Maoists, who pushed more for it. So, but given that they always have these coalitions now in the Constituent Assembly, it really depends on the attitude of the ruling Nepalese Congress, the Prime Minister Sushil Koirala and his cabinet and so on, and his advisors. Also, I think to put this in context, whether it's a perception or a reality is debatable, but I think the basic asymmetry is undeniable. We are much, much, much larger, and here we have this tiny neighbor, and the treaty was signed at the time of the Rana's rule, which was very, very unpopular, and in 1950, and now there are popular forces who are out there and who are free to critique India much more than before, and who will continue to aim barbs at us. So whether there is substance in it or not is different. At least in media perception and at least in the public relations, I think we need to do a lot better. I think we have often you meet Nepalese radicals, Nepalese intellectuals who are saying, you guys, you're just treating us like a vassal state. Whether there is it's a different matter, but we have to contest this, and we can't just say that we are too generous and you're not being grateful, right? We have to also address these issues. So I feel like the treaty, we should be ready for doing it, and we should actually prompt them if you want it. It's a way of getting an irritant out of the way for the rest of the relationship to move ahead. So we should be even more eager and say, come on guys, let's do it, and we are all for it. And I would just emphasize one point here, the issue about the trade relations. I mean, that clearly shows the asymmetry that I'm talking about. 2013 statistics, 220 million Nepalese rupees is what Nepal imported from India, and 20 million Nepalese rupees is all we imported. There is a problem here. We should not just be saying that we are, we are being completely magnanimous. The problem lies with the UP and Bihar lobbies, many of which are into supplying some of the same commodities that Nepalese competitors can give us. Right? There is a degree of protectionism, and I hope that Mr. Modi has clean sweep in UP, and their very strong presence in Bihar now. They can manage these problems, because otherwise, everything from clarified butter to textiles to woolen clothes, this is where I think we can make a big difference quickly by redressing the imbalance. Think about another asymmetry. We talk about our trade imbalance with China. That's growing and growing, and it's a major trade. Look at it from the Nepalese point of view. I mean, what does it take for them to redress this gap, which is like, it's like a huge trade deficit. So these are some places where I think we need to work harder, and the treaty can be a symbolic change. The treaty can say, okay, whatever trappings of feudalism or of vassalage that use, or neocolonialism that you have, some of your those on the left have seen, we are ready to get rid of them on paper. But in practice, we will do much more, especially with trade, especially with people-to-people linkages and with border issues.
I'm afraid I'm completely out of time. A very quick word. You want to come in here?
Strategically, I want to draw back to a regional picture. The Chinese have proposed a so-called Trans-Himalayan Economic Growth Area, which is supposed to create a north-south corridor linking India and China via Nepal.
Okay.
Our very notion of Nepal as a kind of a buffer that would protect us from direct contact with the Chinese is going away. It's vanishing.
Okay.
Rather, it's becoming a conduit. So I think this is the time to speed up our involvement there in a way that matches the Chinese step to step.
All right. Well, I have to leave it at that. It's time for me to wrap up the discussion here. I'd like to thank all my guests for coming to the studios. It was a pleasure having you here. That's it for now in this edition of Insight. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.